When it comes to buyers trying to negotiate with sales agents, I wholeheartedly agree with you. For me, I can find out what sort of competition we're facing, what the likely reserve is, what the agent genuinely thought the property was worth when they appraised it, which comparable sale they feel is the most representative of being comparable, how many bidders will put up their hand on the day. The agent has all of that information, and I can generally get it out of the agent, and it's not about talking in code or extracting information they're not prepared to share. It's about asking them the right questions in the right order and building that trust. And that's where I see rookie buyers making an absolute mess of it.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how and where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You'll hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested. Hi, freedom fighters. When was the last time that you had to negotiate something really important? What did you think and how did you feel both before, during, and after the negotiation? Was it stressful? Were you anxious? And did you achieve your outcome? The interesting thing is that every one of us is negotiating every day. It's just that many times we aren't aware of it. Every interaction where we want to get something or get something done involving others is a negotiation. And one of the core skills to achieve sustainable success in any endeavour is to become a good negotiator. To be able to influence others in a positive way to get what you want or to achieve the best possible outcomes. So today, I want to focus on the subtle art of negotiation. We'll start with some general principles, and then, given the rare window of opportunity that's available to secure good quality property before the impending boom in property values across Australia, we'll drill into some clever negotiation tactics that will help you to secure a property in a high demand market as a precursor to expanding on this during our great conversation with today's guest, Cate Bakos. And the good news is that these negotiation approaches can be utilised in any negotiation situation that you find yourself in. So let's start with some general approaches that you can apply to all and every negotiation. Now, as renowned negotiation expert Margaret Neal reveals, one of the biggest challenges that we face in negotiations is that we view negotiations as a battle. And that battle is characterised by a thinking where we say in our heads, I'm going to try and get stuff from you that you don't want to give me, and I'm trying to keep you from getting my stuff. And if we view negotiations as a battle, we already have a problem. Neil suggests that what's more important is that we look at negotiations as an opportunity for collaborative problem solving, looking for a solution that makes you and them better off than your alternatives, and better off than your status quo. But because there's no single control in negotiation, I can't force you to say yes. All I can do is present proposals where you believe it's going to be in your best interest to say yes. And so, once I take that perspective on negotiation, which highlights the importance of the other party more than myself, so many more opportunities and potential win-win outcomes and solutions start to open up. Whether it's a new job where you're trying to negotiate the terms of your employment, whether you're trying to buy something, whether you're in a meeting, whether you're deciding with your partner who's going to take the dogs for a walk on a cold, dark, rainy morning, whether you're thinking about what the rules are that your kids will have to follow and you'll have to agree to when they decide to use your car. Neil reiterates that you need to focus on solving the problem, not on winning the battle. Because if you find yourself in a battle, in a power struggle in a negotiation, you've already lost. And the key to being able to solve problems in a negotiation is to understand as much as you can about who you're negotiating with, to know what motivates them, what will influence them to move down that path of agreement with you on their own volition. And you need to remember that in negotiation, I can't force you to say yes. And remember that goals are important. We absolutely need to know what a good deal looks like for us, as well as them. But we also need to have the flexibility in how to achieve that goal. We need to remain open to the opportunities and explore often unexpected pathways to go with the flow and to see where it leads to get your desired outcome. You need to have a GPS, not a rigid recipe. And for me, this is a lesson that I continuously learn and relearn because too often I choose a path to my goal because I've chosen it, not necessarily because it's the right one. Now, retired FBI lead hostage negotiator Chris Voss also provides some innovative negotiation approaches in his book, Never Split the Difference. Voss sums it up beautifully when he says that negotiation is the art of letting the other side have your way. And how do you do that? Well, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we need to use them in those proportions. By continuously asking questions and making affirming statements that allow the other party to talk freely, rapport grows and trust develops, and you gain a much greater understanding of exactly what their needs and preferences are, so that you can then create solutions that satisfy them as well as you. It's about building emotional equity and what he calls tactical empathy. In simple terms, people prefer to do business with people they like. So if the other negotiating parties get to know you and like you, they're more likely to trust you, and then more likely to negotiate favourably with you. The magic happens when you ask questions and provide reassuring prompts that allow the other party to come up with solutions that they feel are their idea, but are really in alignment with what you are wanting to achieve. So 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use them in those proportions is the best place to start. So what are the key forces that surround and drive a negotiation? Well, in my experience of literally thousands of negotiations over the years, there's 4 key components: hopes and dreams, uncertainty, trust, and perceived power. So let's break these down. Most negotiations are about helping to fulfill each party's hopes and dreams. It's not generally about the objects or the products themselves. It's about how each party imagines what life's going to be like when they negotiate those things and how their lives and well-being are going to improve. It's not about the item, like the house or the car. In this regard, most negotiations are emotionally driven. And the bigger the perceived value and investment, the higher the emotional investment and expectation, which tends to cloud rational judgment and gets in the way of objective decision making. And I found that the best way to avoid this is to get others to negotiate on your behalf. Now let's turn to uncertainty. The key to a successful negotiation is to eliminate or minimise the uncertainty for all parties. Uncertainty and fear of the unknown generally results in emotionally driven responses. and that instinctual fight or flight reaction that can shipwreck negotiations. So the key is to eliminate uncertainty in the parties and the process with good, clear and regular communication on who is going to do what, by when and why. Now this sounds really simple, but I've found that most people forget this. This means that in addition to you finding out as much as you can about the other party, you also share the right information about yourself that's going to be conducive to the outcome of the negotiation. Now we turn to the critical currency of trust. We constantly need to consider how we can create a trusting environment for a negotiation. How can you be trusted? And how can you trust the other parties? Well, as discussed in my book, The Freedom Formula, and outlined in great detail in Charles H. Green's groundbreaking book, The Trusted Advisor, trust is built on the integrated combination of 4 key criteria. Firstly, credibility, which is what someone has done and said. Then there's reliability, which is someone repeatedly doing what they say they will do. Then comes intimacy, feeling comfortable emotionally with someone, that intuitive gut feel based on openness and honesty. And finally, self-interest, the degree of impartial independence versus the level of vested interest of the parties involved. This is often the most important but often less thought about ingredient. And in this regard, ex-FBI lead negotiation specialist Chris Voss also introduces 2 simple, proven and powerful tactics that you can use in tandem to build trust with almost anyone that you meet. As he says, a great negotiation is actually a great collaboration. And collaboration requires trust between 2 people. And you can improve trust by applying the approach of what Voss calls both mirroring and labelling. Mirroring is a repetition of key words that the other person uses in conversation. It's designed to show the person that you're listening and that you understand and appreciate them. According to Voss, mirroring is most effective when you repeat up to 3 words from the last words that your counterpart has just spoken. And this is especially effective in diffusing anger or hostility. For example, if the other negotiating partner says, "I've had a really difficult year and it seems like you're discounting all the financial and personal stress that I've been under," you simply respond, "Financial and personal stress?" This approach puts people at ease. It reduces tension when it's a stressful situation, and it makes the other person feel like you're listening. And as we all know, people love to talk to someone who's paying attention to them. This simple approach helps building quick rapport. It shows that you care. It reveals more of what's important to them in a negotiation, and it buys you time to think and reflect on the best solutions and options to negotiate a mutually agreeable outcome. The second approach is to use what Voss calls as labelling. A label is a verbal acknowledgement of the other side's feelings or positions. Labels are used to neutralise negative emotions or reinforce positive ones. Labels start with you responding with, "Well, it seems like," or "it looks like," or "you appear to." And these 2 techniques, both mirroring and labelling, work beautifully in tandem. Voss demonstrates the technique in a fascinating exchange. Voss describes sitting across from a woman that we're going to call Stella. And Voss asks just 2 brief questions to kick off the conversation, and then the rest is all about modelling and labelling. So listen out for it, because this is how it goes. Voss starts, "Tell me what you're passionate about." Stella responds, "Well, I love escape room games." Then Voss says, "What is it about escape room games that makes you passionate?" Stella says, "Well, they're fun to do with your friends, and they're immersive, and it challenges your mind." And then Voss responds, "It challenges your mind?" And just note the use of mirroring Stella's last 3 words. And then Stella responds, "Yeah, you only have 60 minutes to get out. There are a series of puzzles you have to solve to get out. And Voss then says, it sounds like you love mental challenges. Now he's using labelling. And Stella says, I do. It's an immersive experience like being part of a play. You also try to make it the best experience for others so they enjoy it too. And then Voss responds, it also sounds like you really like to help people. Again, hear the labelling. And Stella says, yeah, I guess I do. I never really thought about it like that. And then Voss responds, you sound like a really loyal person too. And there's more labelling. And Stella says, oh, that's nice to say. My friends do say that about me. Now, in this brief exchange, Stella never asked Voss a question about himself. She didn't learn much about Voss because she did almost all the talking. But here's the amazing part. When she was asked how she felt about the exchange, she said, it made me feel like he was really listening to me and I connected with him. Now, this simple conversation demonstrates how to build an instant rapport with another person by simply using modelling and labelling to encourage the other person to talk about themselves. And in researching this, I've realised that this is a subliminal approach that I actually take in my podcast interviews to get guests opening up about subjects of interest. And it's amazing how I've built great relationships and friendships with our podcast guests after just one interview. And I think it's because the guests often comment on how connected they feel with me after our discussion. So listen out for examples of my mirroring and labelling approach during today's interview and upcoming episodes. Now, Voss calls this approach trust-based influence. If you want another person to say yes to your idea, you must first gain their trust. And once they trust you, you'll be far more influential and more likely to strike a deal that makes both of you happy. Now we return to the fourth negotiating component, which revolves around perceived power. Where does the perceived power lie between the parties in the negotiation, based on the circumstances and environment surrounding the negotiation? Let me share a good example of something that happened in America some years ago. Imagine that it's late at night in a big city and Ted the businessman is walking through a dimly lit deserted parkland on his way home. All of a sudden, a would-be robber in a black balaclava and wielding a gun sneaks out from the shadows and points the gun at Ted's head and demands that Ted give him his wallet and his Rolex watch or he'll shoot him dead. How would you feel at that moment? Would you be scared? The attacker feels that he holds the power in the negotiation because he's holding the loaded gun and he threatens to take Ted's life by shooting him if he doesn't cough up. An uneasy silence ensues. And then Ted responds, well, thanks, mate. Please shoot me as you're doing me a big favour. I've got terminal cancer and I only have a few months left to live, so go ahead and please put me out of my misery. In an instant, the perceived power in the negotiation has completely shifted. The robber has been completely disempowered. The result? The would-be robber turned and ran into the night. Perceived power can have a big impact on the negotiation stance of the parties involved. So to summarise, the best negotiations fulfil all parties' hopes and dreams, they eliminate uncertainty, they build trust and balance, and they balance the perceived power of the playing field to set the scene to arrive at win-win outcomes. Let's now turn to the specific negotiation of buying a home. And for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to focus on the situation where you're buying a home that's advertised by a real estate agent, because auctions have their own set of rules. Now, generally in these situations, the perceived power is slanted in the direction of the seller, depending on the prevailing demand and supply conditions. Why do I say this? Because this is a situation where you are potentially only one of many competing buyers of which you know nothing about. You're dealing with a selling agent who is effectively a professional negotiator that is negotiating all day, every day. And generally, you don't even know who the seller even is. Now, this situation is a bit like you being the small shepherd David up against the giant, heavily armoured ogre Goliath and his army. You really need to be able to craft the negotiations in a clever way that allows your often single slingshot offer to hit the real estate sales agent Goliath between the eyes in a way that your offer looks better and feels more appealing to both the agent, who's the go-between, and the seller. And remember, generally you only get one shot at it. You're trying to make your offer more appealing than all of the other competing offers to the professional selling agent and the unknown invisible property owner, seller or vendor. The playing field and perceived power is well and truly slanted towards the seller. Now, this is a very challenging and often difficult competitive environment to negotiate in. And here are a few relevant stats to further set the scene. According to a reputable survey in Australia, the average home purchases take over 7 months to complete, soaks up 90 hours of your after-hours time, involves looking at an average of 12 properties that results in over 6 offers before you finally secure your property. Now, that's a lot of your time, stress and headache. I'm sure this is why buying a home is considered one of the major stressors, along with death, divorce and public speaking. So how stressful is buying property? Well, according to surveys conducted by Allianz and Home.com, 42% of buyers feel overwhelmed, 51% of buyers feel very stressed when buying a home. And here are the really interesting stats after the event. 13% feel that they pay too much for the property, and 28% are heartbroken that they didn't get the property they wanted. So let's be clear. Buying a property is hard, costly, time-consuming, and quite stressful. And this all comes to a head in the final price offer negotiation. The time when you're making an offer signals to the selling agent and the property seller that you have a clear interest in the property, and the point when they hold all of the cards. You're only likely to be negotiating on a property only a few times in your life, in a situation where you're dealing with a professional full-time independent negotiator in the selling agent who is doing this all day, every day. And he knows where you sit relative to other buyers that you're not even aware of. The perceived power is clearly with them, as you're wearing the anxiety of most of the uncertainty. The seller hasn't even met you as a buyer, so there's no basis for trust. And all of your future hopes and dreams for you and your family's lifestyle become focused on this property, a highly emotionally charged position. So how can you level a playing field in this situation, particularly in a seller's market like we are experiencing at the time of this recording? Well, fortunately, I've been involved in a huge number of high-price negotiations over the years, both as an architect and project manager, where I was trying to win massive multi-million-dollar design and building tenders for up to $300 million against a lot of international competitors, as well as being personally involved in over a dozen property purchases, and also assisting thousands of our clients to secure property as homeowners and investors. So here are some of my buying negotiating tactics and approaches that I employ, or I've seen employed, to give you the best chance of securing the property that you're interested in. Together with some suggestions I've borrowed from a piece by industry stalwart Bryce Holdaway. Firstly, cash is king. The first tip to reduce uncertainty and give the seller confidence in your offer is to remember that old adage that cash is still king. The key here is that if you're borrowing money to complete the purchase, make sure that you've already obtained finance pre-approval from a lender via your savvy mortgage broker. And it's really important to make sure that this is a full finance pre-approval based on a complete loan application including all of your supporting financial information, and that all the bank needs to do is to complete a valuation to formally and unconditionally approve your loan. Don't fall for the trap of the quick and dirty finance approval letters that many banks offer, that are just based on a quick cursory and often verbal look or chat about your finances. These letters aren't worth the paper they're written on, and given the increased bank scrutiny, along with the continuous and often daily policy changes that banks are making, you can find yourself in the dangerous position of not being able to complete the purchase if the finance approval is then declined once you've provided all of your detailed financial information. However, assuming that you've taken the 1 to 3 weeks to achieve a full finance pre-approval at or above your property purchase price offer, and that your deposit funds are readily available, and you can evidence all of this to the real estate sales agent, this provides increased certainty of your offer without the concerns that are usually attached to offers that are subject to finance. What you're doing here is giving the vendor certainty and security, which is something most sellers, vendors and agents all value enormously. If you make your offer unconditional, meaning it's not subject to finance, this strengthens your offer even further. But if you're lending money from a bank to complete the purchase, I wouldn't suggest taking this risk in the current dynamically changing lending environment. So remember, cash is still king. The next is to know the prevailing selling conditions in the area and for the property. So make sure you research and know the driving negotiation metrics of the area. You need to know what the average days on market and the average vendor discount is in the particular area where you're buying the property. This is about determining if prevailing conditions create an environment that's a buyer's market, a seller's market, or a balanced market. It's about understanding the perceived power position. If there are more sellers than buyers, then it's a buyer's market, and you have much more leverage and power in the negotiation. If it's a balanced market, then there's an equal spread of buyers and sellers. And if it's a seller's market, where there are few sellers and many buyers competing for a property, you need to work much harder, faster and smarter, and potentially have to pay more for the property. And this is exactly the situation that most popular parts of Australia are now in. So you need to research and know your metrics. If properties have been on the market for a long time, as recorded in days on market, you know you've got good leverage in the negotiation. If you can see the market is moving quickly, meaning the days on market are very short, you understand it's a seller's market, and so the negotiating position isn't with you as a buyer. A confirming indicator can also be found by looking at the vendor discount rates. If you can see that they're taking large vendor discounts, the power is with the buyer. Again, if there's little vendor discount, or if it's in a strong market, it's likely to be zero discounts. In fact, it might even sell for more than the advertised price, which is exactly what's currently happening in lots of areas around the country. By doing this, you're able to see the strong and healthy markets, and it gives you an idea of exactly what sort of market conditions that you're negotiating in. And where can you find these metrics? Well, CoreLogic provides reports that you pay for that give you weekly updates on these and other key metrics. Alternatively, you can access these informative CoreLogic property reports for free if you know how finance brokers are assisting you to finance your purchase. And many other property strategists and buyers agents can assist you with the same. The next thing to remember is that negotiating starts at hello. The minute you start talking to an agent, the negotiation has begun. Remember, they're expert negotiators who do this every day of the week. So as soon as they have seen you or started talking to you, they're sizing you up. They're asking you qualifying questions. And even when it seems like they're just chatting casually about you and your family, they're trying to find out where you're at. They want to work out if you're a serious buyer first. And then they want to find out as much information as they can to craft the negotiation when it comes to that time. Don't be surprised if an agent suggests that you and your partner just walk through and feel free to have a look at the property, so they can then spend some time chatting to your kids. Your kids don't know what's going on, and so it's not uncommon for a seasoned sales campaigner to ask your kids lots of leading questions. For example, are you thinking of moving? Are you moving schools? And the kids are quite willing to give all that information, and the agent is banking on this for the later negotiating stage. So remember, as soon as you say hello to the agent, the negotiation has begun. Experienced buyers know this, and they know what to reveal and what to conceal. Next, remember that smart is dumb and dumb is smart. You need to keep in mind that when it comes to property, along with most other negotiations, smart is dumb and dumb is smart. What I mean by this is that you don't want to come across too smart or too clever when it comes to dealing with the selling agent or the vendor. Nobody ever wants to help a clever dick or a know-it-all. However, if a person who comes across as warm, friendly, humble, down-to-earth and curious, most of us, by nature, are happy to help them and give them more information. So when it comes to negotiating, it's a really bad mistake to come across as smart or detached and aloof. You actually want to come across as dumb and friendly, which is easy for me, because then the agent who's dealing with you feels more inclined to give you more information. Then if you're smart about hearing what they have to say, you might get some key intel, which will help you to craft your offer. And you're unlikely to achieve this if you're coming across as an aloof smart-a. So in negotiations, smart is dumb and dumb is smart. Try and keep your ego out of it. Just remember that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that proportion when you're negotiating. This means twice as much listening as talking. And remember that old saying that wise men talk when they have something to say, but fools talk because they have to say something. The next tip is to consider, particularly in an overheated seller's market where there are more buyers than sellers, like we're currently experiencing in most parts of the country, consider making what's called a knockout offer. If you've done your homework on the area and the property with the assistance from detailed property research reports from CoreLogic, which again you can access on a complimentary basis through our know-how brokers if they're assisting you to finance your property purchase, and you know what the true value of the property is, which is often not the agent's advertised listing price or range. If you know what this market value is, based on properties that have sold recently around the area, or if you're looking to be holding the property long term and understand that paying an extra 10 to 20 grand now will be worth a lot more to you in the future, so you're going to put in an offer, consider putting in a knockout price up front and early. This will be attractive to the selling agent who's often looking for a quick sale so they can get paid. It will keep the competition at bay, and it's also likely to get the vendor's attention. Over the years, I've seen many buyers who are afraid to put in a knockout offer or bid if it's at an auction. They wait for the competition to build over time, and ultimately they end up paying more than the price they would have done had they offered a knockout offer from the start. So know the value or how much you are able and prepared to pay for the property, and consider making a knockout offer, particularly in a seller's market where many buyers are competing for fewer properties. This just may blow the competition out of the water and secure your property sooner rather than later. The next thing to remember is that negotiating on the property is not all about price. You need to find out what the selling vendor really wants, what's really important to them, and then everything is up for negotiation, from the timing to the conditions to you name it. Everything is always up for grabs. Now, it takes some time digging, and buyers agents are expert at this, as you would have heard in the opening snippet to today's episode. It's about asking the right questions in the right order at the right time in the right way to find out exactly what the seller wants and needs, because it's not always just about selling for the best price. For example, if there's a divorce involved, then there could be more motivation to have a quick settlement time frame. Or someone may have a real preference to have the perceived security and certainty of an unconditional contract, rather than anything that has conditions like subject to finance or subject to building inspection. This means that in some cases, given the perceived certainty, an unconditional contract at a lower price might be more attractive to a seller than a higher price with conditions attached. In other cases, the seller may be interested in the early release of your deposit to enable them to help secure their next property purchase or whatever it is that they've intended with the funds. It's also worth considering the real estate agent's motivations. As commission-only selling agents, they're often under pressure at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the year to reach their sales targets. So they may be more motivated to make a sale happen in your favour at these times, as it affects their ranking in the office and their income and cash flow. Now, while we're on the subject of timing, here are a couple of extra thoughts. Consider seasonality when you're buying a property. There's generally less demand in the winter and the most demand in spring, so buying property during the quiet times can often be to your advantage. And on a micro scale, a successful tactic that I've employed is to make an offer on a Friday night just before the weekend open inspections, so that you effectively take a property off the market before others get the chance to see it. As the famous author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, famously said, "First seek to understand and then be understood." And this is very important in negotiating the purchase of a property. Find out what it is that they want so you can create a win-win-win scenario for all parties involved, as well as creating other valuable negotiation points that are away from the straight price. This also means that you reduce competition with other potential buyers, as you aim to satisfy the seller's total needs, just not how much they're going to get in real dollars. Next, another buying tip is what I refer to as the tale of two properties. When you're making an offer on a property, always make sure you're perceived as considering to be buying two similar properties at the same time. What I mean by this is the selling agent needs to think you always have a suitable and viable alternative property that you're considering, which we're going to call option B. If you've been out and about looking at property, you'll be familiar with a lot of real estate agents saying to you, "Hey, look, I just need you to know that there's another buyer in the mix." Now, this is negotiating 101 for the agents. But you often don't know if this is true. So a good counter to this is to say, "That's great. I'm still interested in the property, but I also have another property that I'm interested in." You still show that you're keen, but also that you're not desperate for the property. And then you can see what flushes out. Equally, depending on the market you're in, you can say to the agent, "Hey, here's my offer, but just letting you know, I put 2 offers in at the moment on other properties that I really like. So whoever gets back to me first is going to be the one that I take." Again, this gives you a position of strength, provided the market dictates that you can actually do that. So in conclusion, if you're looking to purchase a property, it's important that you're armed with as many winning negotiating tactics that you can when you're up against fierce competition and you're dealing with a real estate agent who negotiates all day, every day for a living. So if you don't come prepared, chances are you're going to be outmatched during the crucial negotiation phase. And this leads me to the biggest tip I can give you to optimize your chances of securing the property you want at the price you want under the terms you want. Engage an independent and expert buyer's agent. It still staggers me that with over 500,000 home sales a year in Australia, only about 2.5% of them involve a buyer's agent. Now, this compares with 45% in the US, where most buyers engage a professional buyer's advocate to find, negotiate and secure the property on their behalf in order to level the playing field and to eliminate the biggest risk in your property purchase. That's you and your emotions, because you just don't know what you don't know, and this can be very costly when it comes to property purchases. And this leads into today's episode, where Cate Bakos elaborates on why you should engage an independent buyer's agent and how you should go about it. As Cate so succinctly said in one of her recent blogs, rushing a purchase during a hot selling season is a critical mistake to avoid. Buying a property safely is paramount, and if the situation doesn't allow, she firmly believes that a buyer is better off letting an opportunity go rather than risking a rushed purchase if the required due diligence can't all be done in time. Now, Cate has a checklist of must-do actions for every shortlisted property. The list includes, but it's not limited to, a physical inspection, a thorough council planning department check for surrounding applications and approvals, a title check, full comparable sales analysis, a rental appraisal if it's an investment property, careful review of AGM minutes if it's a strata or body corporate, a neighbourhood reconnaissance, a contract legal review, and a building and pest inspection. If you can't manage these tasks in time, she strongly recommends that you don't purchase. She knows that when buyers skimp on these steps, issues can strike. From zoning issues to restrictive covenants, obscure title types to plumbing and electrical hidden disasters, troublesome neighbours, expensive special levies not listed in AGM minutes. The list goes on, and the implication of these can be dire and very expensive. The more benign but equally upsetting issue is that when a buyer rushes a purchase in an effort to just get it done and buys a property that won't serve them at all long term, a regretful purchase and a resale costs stamp duty, agents fees, marketing, and a lot of lost opportunity and money. Cate agrees that purchasing in a hot market requires fast decision making, but it should never incite irrational decision-making or tardy due diligence. To me, this further reiterates the need for you to engage an independent buyer's agent when you're buying a property, whether it be a home or an investment property. And today's guest, Cate Bakos, is the best person to share the benefits of buyer's agents with you. Cate is currently the President of REBAA, the National Real Estate Buyers Agents Association. She's also the author of the book Successful Property Investment, which features 48 real-life adventures for readers to digest and glean actionable tips. Cate owns and operates Cate Bakos Property, a boutique and independent Melbourne Buyers Agency firm where her extensive asset selection experience in Melbourne metro suburbs and surrounding Victorian regional markets provides unique benefits to her clients. And Cate is a recognised award-winning performer. In addition to winning the YIP magazine Buyers Agent of the Year award in 2018, that's the Your Investment Property, Cate was a finalist in both 2019 and 13 for the Telstra Business Woman of the Year and the national winner of the Buyers Agent of the Year for Sterling Publishing in 2013. Cate is also a co-host on the podcast series The Property Planner, Buyer and Professor. You can check Cate out at catebakos.com.au. That's catebakos.com.au. So as you can hear, Cate is expertly placed to assist you in all things buying property. So against this backdrop, today's discussion with Cate is very timely and answers all of your questions in relation to where, what and how to buy a property, including what are the keys to successfully buying a property? What are the biggest mistakes that people make around buying property? What are the biggest risks that you need to consider in relation to buying property? How can you eliminate the stress around buying? What does a buyer's agent do? What separates a good buyer's agent from an average one? What should you look for when selecting a buyer's agent? Where can you find a buyer's agent that's best suited to you? What are the reasons and barriers why only a small number of property buyers engage buyer's agents, and how can you overcome this moving forward to create a truly level playing field for property transactions? And we can conclude with what she believes is likely to happen with property in the short to medium term, and where are the opportunities for you. This is another engaging and entertaining discussion that will further motivate you to take advantage of buying a good property in the right way during this rare window of opportunity. So please enjoy Cate Bakos. Hi Freedom Fighters. Now, in recent episodes I've been opening your ears to the rare window of opportunity that's emerged for hard-working Aussies to help to secure their futures with property. So today I thought we'd focus on the critical areas when the rubber hits the road as far as actually buying your next property is concerned. Now, as many of you as you know, I'm a big fan of independent buyers agents. So today, we're going straight to the top of the tree to enjoy a great conversation with Cate Bakos, the President of REBAA, the National Real Estate Buyers Agent Association. So welcome. Let's get invested, Cate.
Oh, it's wonderful to be on the show.
Yeah, likewise, Cate. I've been a quiet admirer for quite some time and really looking forward to a deep dive on a number of subjects that I know are close to both of our hearts. But for those in the listening audience who don't know who you are, let's kick it off by getting you to give us a rundown on who you are, what you do, and most importantly, why you do what you do.
Yeah, it's a great intro question. So, as you said, I'm a buyer's agent, which means I help people facilitate a purchase. So, unlike a selling agent who's representing the vendor, I'm completely representing the buyer. I am an inner Westie in Melbourne, and I've got my own business, and I have amazing staff that work with me, and we all have a lot of fun together in the office. But more about me, I'm a mama and I'm a wife, and I've had a really interesting professional background to get me here. And at one stage, I felt like I had a bit of a patchwork quilt CV, Bushy, but it all culminated well and has come together to, enable me to do what I really love doing, and that is working with people and demystifying some of the fears that people feel about property investing and property purchasing, but also being there to take up the slack and to really make a difference to someone with what's usually the biggest purchase of their lifetime.
Absolutely. So that's pretty much covered the why. Is there anything beyond that around the what drives you to do what you do?
Yeah, I'm pretty driven. When I was young, I wanted to be a GP. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and the idea behind that was because I saw it as an opportunity to help people. And you sit at your desk or in your surgery and someone walks in with an issue, and you sometimes don't have any intel or insight into that. They walk through the door, they give you their issue, and you've got to work around that and come up with a solution that's usually unique. Now, the fact that I hate surgery and I can't stand blood and I get squeamish, there's a lot about this role that has some parallels, and that is, every time my phone rings or someone walks into my office, they'll have their own set of issues or challenges, or they'll have a mandate that I've got to get my head around, and every single day is an exciting day. You never know what's going to happen.
Using that analogy, because just about everyone these days is a Google doctor, and they come in telling the doctor what they think's wrong with them, and very much like
Yes.
your role, where a lot of investors think they know, and often they know enough to be dangerous, of starting to massage their thinking around what might be in their best interest is probably a big part of the challenge early on, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time deprogramming and reprogramming people, and you're right, Dr. Google is a really difficult challenge for a lot of people. And when you read something in a magazine or you chat to someone at a barbecue, just because they've had success doesn't mean that path for you will spell success. Every single person's journey must be different, because we all have different lives, we have different incomes, we have different financial demands. So assuming that you can replicate someone else's strategy is one of the biggest mistakes that can be made, and I blame Dr. Google on that a lot.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Hey, before we get into the teeth of that, what I'd love you to do, and you've sort of started to touch on a little bit, is to get you to walk us through your journey so far and go back as far as you would like to. Because what I'd like to sort of dig into is, what you've invested your time, your energy and your money in, and what have you learned from it, how has it benefited others, and how has it helped you to get to where you are? So
Great question.
Dig in there, again, as early as you like, because often our formative years set up our relationship with money and our approach to what we do in the investment space. So I'd love you to share some of that with us.
Yeah, I grew up down in Sorrento. So my mum and dad raised three of us, and then my cousins came on board after their mum died. And so at a lot of stages in my life, I was the eldest of five. And it was a fantastic childhood. My dad ran a business himself. He had a retail store in Rosebud and worked really, really hard. And the hours were probably pretty similar to my hours. And we just all got used to that. Mum would serve dinner at 8:30 at night after Dad had finished his final house calls. And we got used to a life of not being able to go away for holidays. And a lot of people would say, well, would you need to? You're in Sorrento, which is kind of true. But it was a really good insight for me. I saw exactly how much skin in the game my parents had to have. And when we had a really good week, Dad would come home and announce that we're going out to the pub for dinner, which was a big treat. Back in those days, you'd be able to count your pub visits on two hands for, a 10-year period. And when things were tight, we felt it as well. Mum and Dad would definitely let us know when things were challenging, and you could tell by the food and the specials, and and so we all lived and breathed it. And particularly when the recession hit, that was really hard because Dad had a small business and we were all at a Catholic school, and I remember being a bit fearful about whether we'd be able to stay at a school that was not a public school. But they're the things that I guess shaped my appreciation for small business and the risk that you have to take, but also the rewards that you can have, because my dad never complained about having a boss he didn't like or clients that he didn't like, because he could run his own race and make his own rules. And that was always something that appealed to me. And I worked in the family business. I'd be there on a Saturday. I'd also do the banking. So as a young teenager, I would be carrying cash to the NAB and helping Dad with the books. So it was wonderful insight. And I think I always had that sense of wanting to be financially free, or at least very much in control of my financial future. And I was happy to know that I could take that into my own hands. But in contrast with that life, I studied science. And as I said earlier, I wanted to do medicine and didn't get the score in Year 12 because I mucked around and fell in love and thought about boys too much.
Common problem.
Yeah. So I didn't get the grades because I just had a really fun Year 12, to be honest. I had a great time. Got my licence when I was 18 in September, which was the worst timing ever. So for any parents out there whose kids can get their licence midway through Year 12, it's a bit of a shocker. And so I got into Monash and studied science, and just by default, I found that I did really well in chemistry, and it wasn't because I loved chemistry. That's how the cookie crumbled. I got it. It's like a language. Once you understand it, it starts to make sense. So I got a pretty good score at the end of third year when you finish your science degree, and I was invited to stay on for honours. And at that stage, I wasn't loving my science degree at all. In fact, the only reason I finished it was I thought it stands for something. I'll get a job somewhere, and it points to, a scientific approach and discipline and an ability to be analytic, and hopefully I'll go and get some sales or marketing job and get a better pay scale than a graduate chemist would. And that was about the guts of it. I didn't have a passion for chemistry at all. And I was asked to stay on and do an honours project, which is your honours year. You're in a lab, you're writing a thesis, you've got to try and discover something. So I did actually discover and name a compound, and I was still way more interested in auction results. So every Saturday I'd read the results. I'd get out and have a look at auctions. I was really tracking property, and I was very interested in it. And my professor actually said to me, if you could spend half as much time back in the lab on the weekends as you spend chasing auction results, you'd actually be a really good scholar. And I'd graduated with a second class honours, which, if you're serious about academia, is a devastating result, because you can't stay on in academia with a second class. And that was a tough blow. So I'll chat about that further on, but it changed my course. And I went into industry, so I ended up getting a job at ICI, and I had a lovely, lovely boss. And I remember about 2.5 years into my role, he said to me, I think you should think about sales and marketing. And I didn't really know what that meant, other than, picturing someone trying to make a sale. I didn't understand what the pathway could be and why he thought that. And it's evident now, I look back, I was a people person, and I was very diligent. My client care and follow-up was good. I prided myself on that. And I think my ability to strategically influence outcomes, even at a corporate level, that was obviously something that he saw. So I bounced sideways into Dulux, and that was a fully owned subsidiary company of Orica at the time. Yep. And I chose Dulux. I could have chosen Chemnet, or I could have chosen Dulux. They were both businesses that had sales and marketing arms. And I chose the one that was closer to home, because I thought, well, it's just down the road, that'll be nice and easy. And so I was out on the road in a sales and marketing capacity, dealing with new customers. And that was a fantastic ride, and a really, really good introduction into, a dynamic business with young energy. It was fantastic. So I had a good time there. But by the time I won the award. They had a science award, a sales award going there. They called it the Spotty, the Sales Professional of the Year. Mm-hmm. And they joke about it because they say there's a Spotty curse. Often they'll give someone the award and then they'll leave shortly afterwards and pursue something bigger. And in all honesty, it did do that for me. It gave me confidence to actually go and get into property. There was no time like the present. I felt like I'd, climbed that mountain and it was my turn and my time. And it was a big risk going into property. And the pathway that I took was I went into real estate sales. So I joined an office in Bayside and learnt so much. And it was tough. It was commission only. There was no guidebook. There was not really any training. You sink or swim. And I was working with guys that had been career salespeople in real estate. So I really had to find a way to embrace it, differentiate myself, be a standout, and try and get past the feelings that a lot of salespeople in real estate experience, and that is just rejection. It's really difficult to keep your chin up. So, the rest is history. I obviously made a go of it and loved it, but really quickly worked out that I wanted a more advisory related role, and I wanted to work with buyers.
Yeah, I'm just going to sort of unpack a little bit of what you've given us a great rundown there in a very quick order, and there's some great stuff I'd love to drill into a little bit. First of those being your relationship with money, because that's and investment for that reason, and then that bridging into your interest in property, because I'd be interested in, firstly, given that environment that you grew up in with Dad driving the business and the whole family being involved in it, where did that leave you in relation to your relationship with money, and then where did the passion for property come from? Can you sort of expand on both of those for us? Yeah,
I can. Dad was able to create his own business and it had its own flavour, and he recognised the things that he was good at. And so he had a real niche, and he was selling hi-fi, so stereos and TVs, and Rosebud has a demographic that's largely retirees, lots of old people, and particularly at the time that he was running the business. And so Dad's niche was to sell nice quality stuff, I think, for top dollar, but he'd come over and set it up and patiently show them how to work their remotes and crawl around in the roof space, putting in wiring and speakers and all that kind of stuff. So it was a real concierge service, and that's what he did very, very well. And he really loved sound and audio equipment, and he was able to sell a product that he believed in. And so that was great. I wanted something that I was passionate about that nobody else could really tackle, or nobody else quite had my niche. And I feel I've done that. But what my dad didn't do was invest. So they just worked really, really hard and aimed to pay down debt. And I knew that wasn't the solution that I wanted to adopt, because there was, in my opinion, wasted opportunity.
And what age were you when you were starting to perceive that? Can you remember?
Yeah, I can. My grandfather was a pretty clever guy and had a great business head on his shoulders as well. And my dad's brothers, two of them were particularly strong with investing, and they purchased commercial property. And I was privy to all of that. When my uncle bought a car yard, I knew all about it because we were all mucking around in the car yard car park while they were trying to do the deal. And it was just clever. And I remembered some of the conversations that came about after valuations came through on the car yard, and it was a no-brainer for me. I knew that if you could sit on an asset that was growing in value, with the power of leveraging and being a multiple property investor, you can have a very different financial position to someone that just carefully pays down their principal place of residence debt and calls it a day.
Love it. And again, sort of in your teens at this stage, am I guessing?
Yeah, I would have been early teens, and I wanted financial freedom. I wanted to have a business that I loved, but not have to work in it full time if I didn't want to.
Love it. What a fantastic lessons to learn at a tender age, Kate. You've been absolutely blessed there, and being the the oldest of five, effectively. I mean, often the eldest, and I'm speaking because I am one as well. You take on a responsibility and a view of the world that's often different from the rest of the siblings.
Yeah, I agree. Birth order just plays such a huge role.
It does. And the other thing I'd like to explore a little bit then is, because you went down the chemistry road with this sort of, didn't quite make it into medicine, so chemistry's sitting in behind that. I guess an interesting choice, given what you've told me. Yes, I'm sensing that there's a need for structure, and the analytical side is something that you're attracted to. And yes, chemistry is pretty black and white, because this element with plus that element equals that element.
Yes.
I sort of understand that, I guess. But an interesting move, because it's quite an introspective type of an industry for someone who clearly loves the people side. Can you sort of talk us through what led you down that path?
Yeah, as in the chemistry path or the sweet chemistry? Yeah. I just found myself stuck in it, to be honest, Bushy. When I first started my science degree, I thought I might have been able to study physics and do something relating to health services, so potentially cancer treatments or radiation therapy, something with patients. That was the plan. Yep. And first year physics is very different to year 12 physics. It was enormously challenging. It was very tough, and I didn't do as well. I think I got a credit. And you need to be getting high distinctions if you're finding a subject that you want to pursue for the rest of your life. And the reality is I didn't want to pursue any of them. I would have preferred to have done a dip ed and been a teacher, truth be told. And working in a lab especially a lab like my lab was, it was an air-sensitive technology project. So air-sensitive chemistry means if your element comes into contact, or if your experiment comes into contact with oxygen or water, it will blow up. So that was scary, and I had to work on a line. So a line means you've got tubes everywhere with argon gas flushing through them, and argon is an inert gas, so it won't react with anything. So it meant that all of my experiments were conducted in tubes that were linked to an argon line with Vaseline around the glass connections so that no air could make it through. And if it goes up, you can blow your lab up and you can hurt or kill your colleagues. So they tend to put you in separate fume hoods. So you have your own bench and your own hood so that you're distanced from people. That in itself already spells out a pretty lonely profession if you're into people.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can see why you would have gone, I need to exit stage left here.
Absolutely. I didn't want to stick around.
No, so you touched on the second class honours, but I feel for you there. I did honours in architecture myself, and I managed to get first class, but that it was spread over 2 years, and I literally averaged 4 hours sleep a night for 2 years to make that happen. It was extremely taxing. So
yes,
having put yourself through that considerable pain, you mentioned that was fairly instrumental. Talk to us about what that meant to you.
Yeah, I had a postdoc guy in my lab that I got along well with. His name was Phil, and he was a lovely bloke from Scotland, and he'd been pretty good to me all year. I asked all the dumb questions about how to do things, and he was great. And Dr. Phil, he saw me that morning. I'd got my result, and I was messy, in a 22-year-old super messy kind of way, like I was sniffling and crying and just could not get past it. And he walked me out to the car park and said to me, "You might not understand this now, and you might wonder why I'm saying this, but I know you, and I've worked with you for the whole year, and you're going to one day remember that I told you it's the best thing that ever happened to you that you didn't get first class, because you shouldn't be here in academia. You should be out there smashing it." And that was great advice. He was spot on, and I've never forgotten it.
Good read, very good read for someone to see that and instill the confidence in yourself at a time when you were probably feeling quite vulnerable and disappointed.
Yeah, so. I think part of my upset wasn't just having an element of doubt about where my life would take me, I was actually pretty terrified about telling my parents, particularly my dad. And I have a dad who has very, very high expectations, and what I love about that is they never imagined that there was something that any of us couldn't do. So there was no glass ceiling, there was no limit. But if there was a floor, it was set pretty high, and I felt like I'd really disappointed my dad when that result came through. And I'm sure if they're really honest, they were, because they had this picture in their minds that I would just keep smashing it in the world of academia, and that just wasn't my destiny.
Tell me, because again, very similar in that regard. I had parents who had very high expectations of me, and that's played out in very interesting ways over my journey. Apart from that instance with the honours exercise and going home to tell Dad, I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't quite get there. Has it influenced your life in other ways? Because it can be something that never gets satisfied. Can you talk to me a little bit about on where you may have seen that impact on what you've done and how you've done it over the journey so far, Kate?
Yeah, I carefully thought about the kids that did smash it and did get first class and did go on to greater things in the field. And what we didn't have in common was they were passionate. So they'd be in class and they wouldn't be taking lecture theatre notes because they have to cram to make sure they get okay marks. They would be just sitting there listening, absorbing it all and loving it. And I never got that. I never ever had a sense of any subject I studied, perhaps with the exception of geology and astronomy. They were interesting. I loved them. But they were the only classes where I'd just pay attention and soak it up and not have to take notes. And I did appreciate that if you want to be the best at something, you have to have that fire burning in your belly to start with. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If the fire's not burning, there's nothing you can do to be the best. You have to find something else, and something else that makes you really excited.
I love it, and that's obviously where it's led you through a weaving path to the world of buyers agency, and you sort of touched on your roles in the cut and thrust area of real estate sales, and it really is a cutthroat exercise and very difficult if you've come off a solid income with one of the chemical companies like Dulux or Orica and others to a retainer that sort of starts mounting up over time. It obviously lasted in that a little while and then bridged into the buyers agency. Tell us a little bit about that part of the journey.
Yeah, I met my husband now, and I say now because I was married to my high school sweetheart, and that was all around the time that I moved into real estate. And it's funny how you can do a couple of life-changing things in one go. I remember thinking, all right, that they'll be devastated, my mum and dad that is, they'll be devastated that I'm leaving my field and leaving a good solid job to go into real estate, and they're already angry with me about leaving my husband. So why don't I just get it all over and done with and just piss them off anyway? And that's kind of how it went. It was a tough year, my goodness, it was tough. But once I was finding my feet and getting into the rhythm of working in a real estate agency, and there is a rhythm, there's a cycle that you go through continuously with your vendors. You win their trust, you market their property, you keep them updated, you help them make the best decisions to get the sale done, and you hold their hand through all of that. You sell to a buyer, and then out of that sales campaign you probably make more prospective vendors, and so the cycle continues. And every house is different, every vendor is different, but the process was the same.
Activity breeds activity, exactly right.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, okay, I'm working 7 days a week. They say you get a day off, but honestly, try and get a day off in real estate. Your phone doesn't stop. And if you don't answer it, someone else gets the deal. So it's a very tough life. And the lifestyle would have been fine if I'd stayed single, but I met Ian, and he was so good about it. He would have my dinner waiting for me in the oven, and we'd eat late at night and all that kind of stuff. But I remember thinking, I don't want to stuff this up. He's great. He's really great. I need to modify my career.
And then you, I'm jumping in here, but I think you did a transition into broking for a little while, and that's very different, a very similar lifestyle to real estate sales, actually.
Yeah. So I did mortgage broking, and it was a great apprenticeship. It really was. It was a tough job, and I absolutely take my hat off to mortgage brokers, because you can put everything together perfectly at your end, and it can be a flawless application process, but for whatever reason, for things outside of your control, can prevent that deal moving forward. And it's heartbreaking, because you've got an upset client on the other end of the phone. You've got no money for all of your time and effort. You've had to deal with banks and put yourself under a lot of stress in doing so. It's a really difficult job. So for all the brokers out there, I think you guys are amazing. I learnt all about mortgage broking in one of the toughest periods, I'd say. I worked through the GFC.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah. So what I learnt was how quickly lenders could pivot with policy, how quickly our regulators could pivot with policy as well. We went from no-doc and low-doc lines and 104% LVRs to 80 LVR restrictions and really difficult scrutiny. And then all of a sudden the government did what they've done right now. They stimulated things to get people to spend again, and then values took off again. And it was just this crazy roller coaster. But what I learnt to do, aside from think like a financier and spot risk like a lender and assess things like a valuer, I also learnt how to deliver bad news. Yes. And that's a horrible way to have to do it. I had very, very upset news to deliver almost on a daily basis for some people, and not through any fault of my own. That obviously committed to something. They thought they'd get their finance and the conditions had changed. And it was terrifying at first, but it also made me appreciate that I can deliver bad news and workshop solutions and deal with high-stress situations. And it was all of that culminating to point me back to property. By this stage, I had a little girl who was at kinder, and I had a husband who was really supportive. And he'd always been saying to me, Miss Property, if that's something you want to go back to, you should think about it. We'll be fine. And we have indeed. He's been amazing.
Fantastic. And that support network is both financially and emotionally in the sort of industry that we're all working in. It's very difficult to maintain a family if you don't have that level of support, actually. Speaking firsthand there. Love that. So let's dive into the world of buyers agency if we can, Kate, because this is the topic that both you and I really have some passion about. Yeah. So talk us through, for those listeners who aren't totally familiar with what a buyer's agent is and what a buyer's agent does, and perhaps also just cover off the distinction, if there is one, because I don't believe there probably is, between a buyer's agent and a buyer's advocate, because people often get confused.
They do.
Yeah, talk us through all that just as a starting point.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing I'll demystify is advocate versus agent. It's the same thing. We have an advocate-centric way of describing buyer's agents in Victoria in particular. It's a very Melburnian saying. But a buyer's advocate and a buyer's agent, we're the same thing. What is different in the world of buyer's agency is whether you're an independent buyer's agent or whether you're selling stock off a stock list for someone else. So you might be promoting property, but if you're getting paid by the person who owns the property, then you're not independent. Yeah. So an independent buyer's agent takes a brief, makes a recommendation, and then goes out on the hunt, typically. But there are a few things that buyer's agents do. We're not just restricted to one type of service. I might have someone call me about bidding for them on the weekend because they're going skiing or they're away or they don't want to bid. Or I might have someone contact me about appraising a property so that they know how much they should be paying. And then I'll have someone contacting me about their potential property portfolio and wanting advice on where to get started. So it can be an end-to-end, all-inclusive strategy, search, negotiation, bidding, settlement kind of process, or it can be bits and pieces. It's really up to the buyer's agent to determine what their offering is and what they're restricted to.
Yeah, brilliantly said. Great summary. Let's step in parallel outside that for a minute and look at, you've seen people who go through the process themselves, and let's face it, unfortunately, at this stage of the game, about 97% of Australians do tend to buy their properties themselves, for better or worse.
Yes.
I'd love you to sort of go through what you see as some of the biggest mistakes that people are making around buying a property and investing in property, Cate.
Yes. The first one is getting the two confused. You're either buying a home or you're buying an investment. And as soon as you try and do both, you blur the lines and you risk stuffing it up. And too many people get hung up on trying to get investment elements in their home purchase and ultimately buy something that they're not happy with long term because they've compromised on their wish list in an effort to try and chase something that they think represents capital growth. And the other thing I think people make a mistake with is assuming it's easy, and anyone can buy a property, Bushy. You and I both know that. You could go and buy one tomorrow, anyone could. Yeah. But buying a property and buying a good property well are two different things. So people that oversimplify it or don't do any planning, people that buy a property like they're buying a pair of shoes, I just shake my head and wonder what's going through their mind, because I know nothing about the share market and I would never just go and spend $500,000 on a parcel of shares. I'd get advice.
100%. What about the flip side? Because you're right, there's a lot of people who go to an auction on Saturday as they're going to the supermarket to get a loaf of bread, put their hand up and then go, okay, what am I supposed to do now? I just can't believe that there's people still doing it, but it happens. The flip side of that, though, are those that procrastinate themselves to death, and there's always a reason why now's not quite the right time to do something. What's your experience of that, and how are you able to educate, inform and inspire them to be taking the leap in the experience you've had?
Yeah, if someone can, sometimes, you know, a lot of knowledge, a lot of information can be a dangerous thing, and you know, so many people can research this and feel like they can get their head around it. But I think the most important thing to canvass when you're about to do something significant is to sit down with a professional and have them ask you why. And again, why? Every time you have an answer, why? To get to the very heart of your why. And it has to be a good, firm reason for doing so. So many people jump into property without understanding their why, and an experienced person can talk you through that very easily.
Yeah, beautifully said. And once you've got clarity around the why, that becomes both a magnet and a compass then for all the decisions that you make around the property from that point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I love that. Okay, if we're focusing back in on the buyer's agency role then, because it does, unfortunately, either it's a lack of awareness or it's a lack of understanding of the benefit that a buyer's agent brings to the transaction. Because I'd still scratch my head at why there are so few people who engage buyer's agents.
Yeah.
In terms of increasing the listener's awareness of the benefits, what are your thoughts around that?
Every time I'm asked this, and it's all the time, I say to people, I know you'd love me to demonstrate that I can get you a bigger discount off this property than what my fee represents. But that's the one thing I can't deliver to you. And there's two reasons why. Sometimes the asking price is the right price, and you can't get a discount, and you should be making a quick move for the right property at the right price, because long term it will benefit you. The other reason why I can't demonstrate it is, even if I thought I bought a property at a fantastic discount, there's no way that I can calibrate that and show it to someone, because we can't repurchase or re-auction the property with a different set of conditions. It's not like you can have an auction again to replicate what the situation would have been if Cate Bakos wasn't bidding. It's one of those once-only situations, and even if you did have an auction the very next day, you'd have a set of dynamics that are different again, You might have one less or one more buyer. You might have a different auctioneer. You could have a vendor feeling differently on the day. So it's one of those wonderful situations where there's one chance at it and there's one result, and you can only look at comparable sales and say, well, it looks like Cate bought that really well. That's about as much of a guarantee as I can give someone. I'll be able to say to them, well, compared to the comparable sales, which you'll have in detail, you can then determine how well or advantageously I purchased the property for you. But the real benefit in having a buyer's agent is not making a mistake. That's the most important and significant part of it. And I use the John West principle. If you remember the saying on the ad, it's a fish that John West rejects that makes John West the best. And property has to be considered like John West fish. I say no to so many properties. I reject so many. It's the ones that make the cut that are good investments. And lastly, even if it's an owner-occupier purchase and I've followed the brief and looked at all of the criteria and delivered the right product, it's the invisibles that we have to be aware of as well. Because if something has a big dirty easement running through it, or it's the wrong zone, if there's something that could change the face of the buying experience for the purchaser, whether it means their finance can't go through or they purchase a property that cost an absolute bomb because something was missed, they're all epic fails. And so many buyers don't know how to spot an invisible epic fail. And that's what we bring to the table. We have to. And it's a very heavy weight on my shoulders and any other buyer's agent's shoulders, because our job is to protect the client and to spot the red flags, even the invisible ones. But I don't think enough attention can be placed on that element alone. And then lastly, if it's an investment purchase and I can find something that will outperform an alternative decision even by 0.5% per annum over the long term, that will stack up
to hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars of exercise over a 15 to 20 year time horizon. And I can't agree with you more on just how important that part of it is. I think from my side, Cate, part of the exercise that I see, it's some of the intangible benefits of getting a buyer's agent. But
yes,
the time side of the equation is really key. Most people, if they're trying to do this part-time, they don't do it very well. They don't know what they're looking for. Often the emotion drives the decision rather than, if it's for investment, then the numbers have got to talk more loudly than the property.
Yes.
And the property's obviously got to fit that mould, but there's a big part of that. But also, negotiating the actual purchase of a property is right up there with death and divorce as far as stressors is concerned. No, it is. And most people really have difficulty with that, and therefore, when they're up against a professional negotiator, which is a sales agent who does it every waking minute, then the chances of actually negotiating terms that it's not all about price. There's a whole bunch of things that are a benefit to the vendor and to the purchaser that are beyond the dollar value. But to have someone who removes that emotion and has the negotiation skills to de-stress, to save time, and effectively find a better performing property over the long term are the merits that I see a buyer's agent really bringing benefit. And for 20 grand on a purchase that can be anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million, that's a no-brainer for me in terms of getting a better result, but also removing myself from the equation, because I often say, property's only good as the weakest link, and often the weakest link is the investor or the buyer, because they just don't have the knowledge to be able to understand what they don't know and what they're investing in. So
I love that you believe in that, Bushy. It's refreshing, because you can imagine how many people I have who gasp at the fee and don't see the value, and it's obviously up to us to educate them or to share what our role is in the process. But when it comes to buyers trying to negotiate with sales agents, I wholeheartedly agree with you. For me, I can find out what sort of competition we're facing, what the likely reserve is, what the agent genuinely thought the property was worth when they appraised it, which comparable sale they feel is the most representative of being comparable, how many bidders will put up their hand on the day. The agent has all of that information, and I can generally get it out of the agent. And it's not about talking in code or extracting information they're not prepared to share. It's about asking them the right questions in the right order and building that trust. And that's where I see rookie buyers making an absolute mess of it.
Totally. They expose information, and a clever seller's agent asks what appear to be quite innocent questions that are giving them a lot of information around where the buyer's at and how keen they are to get their hands on the property, which totally tilts the negotiation situation. So, I'd absolutely love that. And I guess I'm going to put a challenge to the listeners right now to next time you're buying a property, and for those that are smart, you'll be doing it over the next 6 months, given the conditions that we're coming into. I challenge you to reach out to a really good independent buyer's agent in your location or the location you're looking to get the property in and experience the difference. Awesome. Now, what I'd love you to also expand on, given your industry role as the president of REBAA, and did I get that right?
Yeah.
It's the Real Estate Buyers Agency of Australia exercise?
That's right.
Yep, great.
Yes.
I often wonder.
You did.
Yeah, that was a fluke.
Difficult acronym, I know.
It's a big role with a big mission, given the growth that buyers agents can be doing in Australia, and obviously the representative body. Are there any codes of conduct attached to that separate the good buyers agents from the not so good, apart from the independence equation, Kate?
Yes, I believe so. We've got a pretty strict code of conduct, and entry into becoming a member requires you to have two people that will vouch for you, so your sponsors. And we also need to say that they've demonstrated a certain amount of time in the industry. So it's not to say that there aren't some newcomers that are very, very clever and talented, but it's to say that experience really counts for a lot. And we have mentoring for our new members within REBAA, and we've got various levels of membership, so provisional, full, and it's all pretty apparent on our site. And I think that the beauty with an organisation like ours is that peer support, the moral support, the training that we have on offer, it's incredible. And for anyone who is still establishing themselves in the industry, to be a part of that and to be surrounded by really experienced people who do give freely, I think it's an amazing group. And I turn to my REBAA members often, whether it's just for moral support through COVID when we're a bit blue down here in Melbourne, to asking if they know someone in their area that could do X, Y, Z. It's a really tight group, and considering that there's less than 100 of us as members to date, it's an enormously tight-knit group, but I think we've got some really good coverage too. And it's about bringing consumer awareness to the fore and having consumers understand what they can expect out of a good independent buyer's agent and how they can interview and ask questions. And there's a lot of information there in the portal for consumers as well, but it's really to give consumers confidence that there's been a rigorous membership set of requirements.
Love that. Well, let's dig into a little bit of that right now, because if we've inspired property purchasers to get a buyer's agent on board, what should they be looking for when they select a buyer's agent?
The first thing I say to someone is, obviously credentials and experience is important. You need to say that's there and it's genuine. They're qualified, they're licensed, they've got insurance, all of those tick box things. Yeah. But the most important thing is how you feel about talking to them, like really talking to them. If you're comfortable enough with them that you can challenge them and that they can challenge you, and the trust is high and the authenticity is high, then you're already on the right path. And there are some great buyer's agents that don't get along with every single client. Obviously, I don't get every single person that I get in front of, but the ones that do want to go with me, I want them to feel that they can have a conversation or ask me to explain why I've made a recommendation, or ask me to be accountable. And that's okay. And I also want to know with them that I can tell them something they don't want to hear, and they know that it's because I just want a great result for them. So trust and the ability to have an open and frank conversation is really paramount. If you're feeling bullied or lined up or intimidated or silenced by your BA, you've got the wrong BA.
Yeah, totally agree. Unfortunately, I've seen a couple in the industry because their meal ticket is tied to the purchase of a property, and
Yes.
There can be undue pressure at sometimes when the financial need of the buyer's agent is overriding the needs of the client, to sometimes add a little bit of pressure to buying a property that may not be the absolute perfect fit. What I like about REBAA is that you've culled out the types of operators that play that sort of a game.
That's a really tough situation for any consumer to be stuck in, because you want to think that your advice and recommendations are coming from an independent place. And you've touched on something that, you know, is every buyer's agent's situation to deal with, and that is, when the property is pretty good and it's not amazing, do you push it? And the short answer is no, unless the client is under super high time pressure and they've said to you, I absolutely need to buy by this time and this date, and I'm okay with okay. And you've got to be very, very clear about, you know, the limitations of the property or what could have been better. And it's not a situation that anyone wants to be in, you know, to make a recommendation for something that they're feeling so about. You want to know that you're giving your client the best that you can. So I think it's a tough one, because, as you've said, we get our final payment when we place a client. But like a real estate agent who's representing a vendor and trying to get the highest possible price, you'd like to think that they'll be thinking long term about their reputation and their result and the legacy that they're leaving for that person, and that pride will override a sense of wanting to get paid.
Totally, 100% agree. Awesome. Look, I really think you've opened the listeners' ears to the benefits that they can enjoy as a result of engaging a good buyer's agent via the REBAA banner. I'd love to start looking forward a little bit now, because I'm not sure on your views, but I'm certainly pretty bullish. And I've been in the industry a long time. There's not often I get excited about conditions that are sort of coinciding to create some significant opportunity, but I think in certain parts of the country that's exactly where we're headed with underlying conditions. What do you believe is likely to happen with property in the short to medium term, and where do you see the opportunities emerging?
Well, we have had a year of opportunity, and sadly a lot of people felt more fear than a sense of wanting to grab that opportunity. So the time to buy was when COVID hit and everyone was terrified and didn't want to buy. I don't need to keep talking about that, because there will be so many people who are remorseful that they missed the opportunity. Yeah. And you have to weigh up your own sense of personal risk and financial risk and make that decision, and not lament it, not look back over your shoulder and not let it haunt you. You have to pick your things up and move on and deal with the market conditions that we now find ourselves in. And one thing that our policymakers and our politicians have done really well is stimulate consumer sentiment and get people buying again. And they've not just restricted it to certain segments of our markets. Property has been a winner as well. And so from state-based incentives around stamp duty to federal initiatives such as the home builder grants, we've seen a lot of energy get tipped into property to get people buying again. And in tandem with the lowest interest rates we've ever had and another rate cut, and us coming out of COVID so far looking pretty good, we've seen, you know, a perfect trifecta of reasons to go and purchase. And of course everyone's been heeding that opportunity. And my prediction is that if we do see the responsible guidelines easing in March, that will further stimulate spending. It will mean not only a select group of people who have jumped through the right hoops will get cheap money, it means more people can jump through bigger hoops and get cheap money. And that will be the game changer, I feel, and we'll see investors return if and when that happens. So I believe that the tough conditions that we're experiencing now and the market growth that we're seeing in a lot of our markets, both capital cities and regional, will continue, but it will be exacerbated if lending changes next year. Absolutely.
Beautifully said, Kate. I thought you summed up the opportunity this year, but the ongoing opportunity extremely well. And I don't know about you, but I'm very excited about what next year's going to bring in the world of property. For those who are smart enough to recognise that opportunity and take it while it's sitting there in front of them. Cate, I'd love now to swing into what I affectionately refer to as the ambush round, where I just ask 5 quick questions that listeners always love to enjoy your words of wisdom on.
Oh, so, I love it.
First of those is, what's your favourite quote and why?
Carpe diem. For anyone who's my age, they'll know exactly which movie this came out of.
Robert Williams' classic.
Yeah, it was an awesome saying. And it's a great quote. Carpe diem means seize the day. And you have to. You can't sit around waiting for a sign or being too fearful. Sometimes you just have to have a crack.
Absolutely spot on. Yeah, the best day is always today.
Always.
I agree with that. In the reading sector, now, we haven't touched on your book, actually, the Successful Property Investor Stories, or the 38 cases, that real-life stuff that you share. So I do point listeners to getting their hands on that, because that's, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that really sort of takes the readers on a journey through actual property adventures where you talk about successes and the pitfalls as real learning experiences.
Yes.
What sort of a book would you, or what is the book or a couple of books that you'd recommend the listeners get their teeth into?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know what? I'm not an avid reader like I used to be, and it's because I write stuff and listen to stuff. But when I first got started, there was a book that made a lot of sense to me, and it didn't necessarily signal the strategy that I wanted to adopt, but it spoke to me about cash flow, and it was really clever. And that was a book, one of the first books that Steve McKnight wrote. And he's the guy that bought hundreds of properties around Wendouree West in Ballarat, and say what you like about his strategy, but he had a different thought to a lot of mainstream authors at the time, and you can read some fabulous authors' work and really understand property investing. But Steve talked about cash flow, and he talked about it in a way that was easy to understand. And essentially, it was about amassing a portfolio of positively geared property and being able to pay down your debt really quickly, and then have this passive income through the rents. And in an ideal world, it sounds great, but what I quickly worked out was, if Steve had 200 properties, he had 200 headaches, because his properties were generally in lower socio-economic areas, and there's nothing wrong with that. You've got to think about balance and risk and diversification, but he was targeting areas where you do tend to get some more, wobbly tenant journeys and phone calls from your property managers. And I just think, imagine that times 200. And then you've got to take tax into consideration. And so it was a great book that got me thinking about why I wouldn't do that. But it was really, really good for me to understand the importance of cash flow and debt retirement and how it all fits together, because we can't just chase capital growth rainbows and max out our borrowing capacity and then be on this treadmill that requires us to stay in our corporate jobs because we've chewed up too much debt. We've actually got to think, what's the end date and what do we want out of this and how will it happen? So that really got me thinking. Yeah,
I totally agree. I'm a voracious reader, and I've read all of his books, and 0 to 350 in 3.5 years, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
One of his little Bibles, which is 0 to Financial Freedom, a very short, sharp book, which is all about the strategy piece and getting clear on your why, is also a very good read, actually, and a quick read for those who want to sort of immerse themselves in that thinking. I love that. Some great insights there, because you're right. It's what you do after the property and how's it going to get you to the end game. And can you afford to last a distance? That's the thing that a lot of people don't spend any energy on. They just don't really understand how much per week this is going to be pulling out of their pocket for how long.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Really affects the sustainability of actually getting there in the end. No, love that. Now, this one's a little bit left field, but most Aussies still believe they pay too much tax. So what's the top legal thing that you've done to minimise the tax that you pay?
I love it. Look, the obvious thing to say is a depreciation schedule and good tax advice. If there's tax to be saved, then capture it all, for sure. But the overarching thing that I'll say is, when you're when you're saving tax, it means that you're losing money, and lose money for the right reasons. Lose money because it's cash flow, but the greater end game is excellent capital growth. But I actually say to people, if you're paying a large amount of tax, it means you're earning a large amount of money. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Often my accountant says, look, if you want to pay less tax, I'll just charge you more.
I love it.
And yeah, it's so true. If you're paying good tax, it means you're making good money. So not actually an issue in that regard. But as you say, there are some clever ways of minimising it in a way that's beneficial to the cash flow, and depreciation scheduling and structuring the property side of the equation so that it at least optimises that position can make a meaningful difference to that affordability piece. No, love that. Back on the investment stream then, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've received today?
I hope he doesn't listen to this because I say it a lot when I'm asked this question, but my dear dad told me not to buy an established property as my first property back when I was 21 because he thought that I would be taking on too much debt, and if it was established, I'd be taking on maintenance headaches as well. It was the worst advice ever, and I was regretful for a long time about the opportunity that I missed. And the case in point was a house in Bentley that I could have bought for $132,000, and my dad encouraged me to buy an off-the-plan townhouse in Mordialloc, and it ended up costing more than Bentley, and the townhouse would be worth about $900 now, and the house would be worth about 1.6.
Yep.
It was bad advice.
Yeah, but it's the old story. You just don't know what you don't know.
And we turn to our dads often. A lot of people do because they're our protector and they have all of the words of wisdom. But if this isn't their core, then find someone whose core it is.
Yeah, very good advice. What about the best piece?
I've had lots of good advice over the years with investment. Buy and hold, and I don't even know who planted that seed initially, but once you've made a decision and backed yourself, you can't just sit there looking at the valuation of the value of the property on a scorecard and driving yourself inside out about stressing how it's performing. It's a long game. So make the right decision, back yourself, be prepared for the cash flow and maintenance scenario that you've created for yourself, and let it just do its thing, because property doesn't perform in a linear fashion. And if you get up close, you'll see a static graph, but if you stand back and let it do its thing, that curve will start to look attractive after decades.
Totally, and it's more an S-curve sort of a format with quite short periods of growth. The growth spurts are normally only 2 to 5 years, and then you'll see, I call it the peak to plateau sort of pattern that you see.
Yes.
That's almost at the precinct level. It's not even at suburb level, it's at precinct level. So for mine, and those cycles generally average about 15 years. So if you're not in the property for 15 years, you're not optimising your opportunity. And if you're trying to do it less than that, and both you and I know that 50% of first-time investors sell their property within the first 5 years.
Yes.
Because they're going in with the wrong expectations of what it's all about. Then they're really missing a massive opportunity that's sitting there in front of them. No, love that. Last question of the round then comes back to your personal level. What's a personal habit or a happy habit or a rewarding ritual that contributes most to your investment success so far?
Oh, I love this question. I thought about it in two ways, if I may, Bushy. So my first investment model is my property portfolio. And then my other investment is obviously my business, because this is my job. It's my lifestyle. It's something that I'm very proud of, and I employ people. So if I look at my business as an investment, and it's I invest very heavily in it, it's discipline. So being regular. If I write a Sunday blog, then every Sunday the blog comes out. There's no missing a week or being late and having it come out on a Monday. I think the best thing a business owner can do is have continuity and discipline, and I pride myself on that. So if people ask me, do you ever sleep? Well, then some nights I don't get much sleep, but that's what it's all about when you run your own business. And if I think about a personal habit that's contributed to my investment success, it's not living to the very edge of your means every time you have an opportunity to do so. And what I mean by that is, when you graduate and you're on $30,000 a year or $50,000 a year or whatever it is now, you're still on noodles and bread and water. You're not going out for Wagyu steak and fine Shiraz. And what we're very good at doing is adjusting our expenditure to our income. And that's what brings people undone often when we have downturns or something goes wrong. You lose your job or you get sick or whatever. If you've all of a sudden gone from driving a Toyota to driving a Mercedes to driving a Porsche to driving a Ferrari, well, you've wasted a lot of your opportunity to do something really meaningful with your money as well. I'm not saying that we shouldn't enjoy our cars, but if you can keep that in check and experience an income increase and still keep living the same, your financial position will ultimately reflect that. But your sense of happiness may also as well, because you don't have to live a simple life, but you can live a life that doesn't put undue pressure on you when you don't respond to upping your expenses.
Love that. I mean, the lifestyle inflation that tends to bite into a lot of people without going, well, how much is enough and how do I want to live? And once I've got there, everything else I can put into helping to sustain that lifestyle is a key question that unfortunately a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about. Awesome. All right. Well, final question then. If I gave you a microphone that spoke to every single one of the 7.7 billion people that are currently alive in the world, Kate, and I gave you exactly 60 seconds to talk, what would you say?
Oh, my goodness. This one was the question I was stressing about. I gave this careful thought. My minute would be about the fact that we just have one life. You get one crack. And you can try and protect yourself from taking risk. You can try and take the easy path. You can do things that might not be stressful at the onset. But if you're not grabbing an opportunity that might excite you and just giving it a go, you're potentially missing out on some really amazing things. And risk and reward, they go hand in hand. This is a really important thing that if you ever go and visit an old person in a home or you chat to your grandies when they're getting old about the best things they did in their life or what they wish they'd done differently, often when people are remorseful or wistful about what they didn't do, it's because they didn't take that risk or they didn't tell that person they loved them or they didn't, cash in their job to go and do something really exciting when the opportunity was there. And if you can take a risk and give something or several things a crack, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. You pick up the pieces, you're more resilient, you move on. But if it goes right, oh my gosh, how awesome would that be?
I totally agree. Extremely well said. And it's, I think if anyone is harbouring regrets, I think regret is one of the biggest cancers of an enjoyable lifestyle, actually. It's if only or what if. If you find yourself asking yourself those questions, then if you've still got breath in your lungs and you're fit and healthy, then extinguish those regrets and get out there and have a crack.
100%.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. A great way to finish off on, Kate. We've done it pretty quickly today, so I'm going to challenge you to come back and join me again at another time, because what we didn't touch on today was your own property investment journey in the portfolio that you built. And I'd love you to share that story, because obviously it's fed into that great book, Successful Property Investment. But it'd be great for you to share that with the listeners as well, Kate. So,
I'd love to. Yeah, I've made enough mistakes to entertain a crowd for
join the club. I'm right with you there. Awesome, Kate. Look, it's been really great. It's been long overdue, and looking forward to maintaining contact with you, both on the podcast, but also getting you to look after some of our clients as we move forward. So appreciate your time today, and looking forward to staying in touch.
It's been a privilege and it's been lots of fun, Bushy. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Well, freedom fighters, how good was that? To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. It's hello@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/get-invested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you'll live forever and live as if you'll die